Caroline Porter had never been so cold in her entire life, and she had grown up in the unforgiving winters of Boston. But this was different. This was Wyoming territory in December of 1876, and the blizzard that had descended upon Lone Pine was unlike anything she could have imagined. She stood on the platform of the small train station, clutching her carpetbag to her chest, watching the last traces of the westbound train disappear into the white curtain of snow, leaving her behind in a town where she knew absolutely no one except the man she was supposed to marry. And he was 300 miles away in Cheyenne, expecting her to arrive tomorrow. The wind howled through the wooden planks of the platform, and Caroline felt tears freezing on her cheeks before she even realized she was crying. This was not how her new life was supposed to begin. She had sold everything she owned back east, said goodbye to the only home she had ever known, and traveled across the country to marry a man named Robert Thornton, a rancher who had corresponded with her for 6 months through carefully written letters. Now she was stranded in this tiny settlement with night falling fast and temperatures dropping by the minute. "Miss, you cannot stay out here." The voice came from behind her, firm but not unkind. Caroline turned to see a tall man in his mid-20s standing in the doorway of the station house. He wore a thick wool coat and a hat pulled low against the wind, but she could still make out strong features and concerned gray eyes. "You will freeze to death before morning. Come inside." Caroline hesitated for only a moment before the wind made the decision for her, nearly knocking her off her feet. She stumbled toward the door, and the man reached out to steady her, his grip strong and sure. Once inside, the relative warmth of the potbelly stove in the corner made her gasp with relief, though she was still shivering violently. "Sit here by the stove," the man said, guiding her to a wooden chair. He moved with efficiency, grabbing a blanket from somewhere and draping it around her shoulders. "I am Ethan Gardner, the ticket agent here." "And you are Caroline Porter," she managed through chattering teeth. "I was supposed to be on that train to Cheyenne. I was in the general store buying supplies for the journey when I lost track of time, and when I got here, the conductor said they could not wait even one more minute because of the storm." Ethan nodded grimly as he poured hot coffee from a pot that had been warming on the stove. "The conductor was right, though I am sorry you got left behind. This storm is only going to get worse. The telegraph lines are already down, and I expect we will be snowed in for at least 3 or 4 days, maybe a week." Caroline felt her stomach drop. "A week? But I was supposed to arrive in Cheyenne tomorrow. My intended, he will be worried sick. He will think something terrible has happened." "Something terrible would happen if that train tried to continue in these conditions," Ethan said, handing her the coffee. His voice was practical but held a note of sympathy. "Better to be stranded and alive than frozen on stalled tracks somewhere between here and there. When the storm clears and the telegraph lines are repaired, we will send word that you are safe." Caroline wrapped her gloved hands around the tin cup, feeling the warmth seep through the fabric. She studied Ethan more closely now that panic was not completely overwhelming her senses. He was handsome in a rugged way, with dark hair that needed a trim and a strong jaw covered with several days' worth of stubble. His gray eyes were intelligent and kind, and there was a competence about him that made her feel slightly less terrified about her situation. "Is there a hotel in town?" she asked. "Somewhere I can stay until the trains are running again." Ethan's expression grew uncomfortable. "There is one boarding house, run by Mrs. Henderson, but it burned down 2 weeks ago. She and her family are staying with relatives now while they rebuild. There is no other accommodation in Lone Pine. The town only has about 40 permanent residents, and we do not get many travelers, especially not in winter." Caroline felt fresh tears threatening. Then where am I supposed to stay? The station house has a back room with a cot, Ethan said slowly. It is not much, but it is warm and dry. You can stay there. I live in a cabin about a mile from here, but I cannot take you there. It would not be proper, and in this storm we would likely freeze before we made it even halfway. So we are both staying here? Caroline asked, her voice small. I am afraid so. But I promise you, Miss Porter, I am a gentleman. You will be perfectly safe. I will sleep out here by the stove, and you can have the back room with the door closed. In the morning, once the worst of the storm has passed, I will see if we can get you to the church. Reverend Matthews and his wife might be able to take you in. Caroline nodded slowly. It was not an ideal situation, but what choice did she have? At least Ethan seemed trustworthy, and she would certainly freeze if she tried to venture out into the blizzard. Thank you, Mr. Gardner. I appreciate your kindness. Call me Ethan, please, and may I call you Caroline? Formality seems a bit ridiculous when we are going to be spending the next few days trapped together in a train station. Despite everything, Caroline found herself smiling slightly. Yes, of course. As night fell completely and the storm raged outside, Caroline found herself sitting by the stove with Ethan, eating beans and hardtack that he heated up for their supper. It was simple food, but she was hungry enough that it tasted wonderful. They talked as they ate, and Caroline found herself relaxing slightly in his presence. How long have you been the ticket agent here? She asked. 3 years, Ethan replied. I came out west after the war ended. I was just a boy during the fighting, too young to enlist until near the very end, but I saw enough to know I wanted to find somewhere quiet and peaceful. Lone Pine suited me. The pay is not much, but I have my cabin. I do some ranching on the side with a few head of cattle, and the work is steady. Do you like it here? Ethan considered the question. I do. It is a simple life, but there is something to be said for simplicity. The people here are good folks. They look out for each other. And the land, well, it is harsh but beautiful. In the summer, the wildflowers bloom across the meadows, and the mountains in the distance turn purple at sunset. I have never seen anything like it. Caroline heard the genuine affection in his voice and felt a pang of something she could not quite name. It sounds lovely. What about you? Ethan asked. What made you decide to become a mail-order bride? Caroline stared into her coffee cup. My parents died 2 years ago in a fire. They owned a small shop in Boston, and they lived in the apartment above it. The whole building went up in flames in the middle of the night. I was visiting a friend that evening, which is the only reason I survived. After that, I tried to make it on my own, but Boston is expensive, and there are not many respectable jobs for a woman alone. I worked in a factory for a while, but the conditions were terrible and the pay was barely enough to cover my rent in a boarding house. When I saw Mr. Thornton's advertisement seeking a wife, it seemed like a chance for a better life. I am sorry about your parents, Ethan said quietly. That must have been terrible. It was. They were good people. They deserved better. Caroline blinked back tears. But I have to keep moving forward. That is what they would have wanted. This Mr. Thornton, have you ever met him in person? No, only through letters. He seems like a good man. He owns a large ranch outside Cheyenne, and he wrote about wanting a partner, someone to build a life with. His wife died in childbirth 3 years ago along with the baby. He has been alone since then. Ethan was quiet for a moment. And you are prepared to marry a man you have never met? Caroline met his eyes. What choice do I have? Go back to Boston and work myself to death in a factory? At least this way I have a chance at a real home, maybe even a family someday. I know it is not a conventional love story, but maybe we can grow to care for each other. That happens, does it not? I suppose it does, Ethan said, but there was something in his tone that Caroline could not quite read. "You should get some rest. Tomorrow might be a long day, depending on the storm." Caroline nodded and made her way to the back room. It was small and sparse, with just a cot and a small table, but it was warm and the blankets were clean. She changed into her nightgown, feeling strange about being in such intimate attire with a man she had just met in the next room. But the door was solid and she heard Ethan moving around, clearly giving her privacy. She lay on the cot and pulled the blankets up to her chin, listening to the wind howl outside. Her mind was spinning with everything that had happened. Just this morning, she had been on the train, nervous but excited about her new life. Now she was stranded in a tiny town in the middle of a blizzard, and the only person she knew was a ticket agent with kind eyes and capable hands. She thought about Robert Thornton waiting for her in Cheyenne, worried when she did not arrive. She felt guilty about that, but there was nothing she could do until the storm passed and the telegraph was working again. For now, she was stuck here, and she would have to make the best of it. Despite her anxiety, exhaustion eventually claimed her, and she fell into a dreamless sleep. She woke to the sound of something clattering in the main room and sunlight streaming through the small window. For a moment, she was disoriented, unable to remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. Caroline sat up and quickly dressed, running her fingers through her hair in an attempt to make herself presentable before opening the door. Ethan was standing by the stove, cooking something that smelled surprisingly good. He turned when he heard her and offered a smile. "Good morning. I hope you slept well. Better than I expected, actually. Is the storm still raging? See for yourself." Ethan gestured to the window. Caroline walked over and gasped. The world outside was completely white, with snow piled up almost to the window ledge. It was still falling, though not as violently as the night before. "I have never seen so much snow. This is nothing compared to what it will be like by the time it stops," Ethan said. "But the worst of the wind has passed, which means we might be able to make it to the church later if you want to see about staying with the Reverend and his wife." "Would you mind?" Caroline asked. "I do not want to impose on you more than necessary." Ethan's expression flickered with something she could not identify. "You are not an imposition, but I understand if you would feel more comfortable with a married couple. Let me finish making breakfast and then we will bundle up and head out." Breakfast was fried cornmeal cakes and more coffee, simple but filling. As they ate, Caroline found herself watching Ethan, noticing small things about him. The way he moved with quiet efficiency, never wasting motion. The small scar above his left eyebrow that she had not noticed the night before. The way he seemed completely at ease in this tiny station house, as if it were a palace instead of a rough wooden building in the middle of nowhere. After breakfast, they both dressed in as many layers as they could manage. Ethan helped Caroline wrap a scarf around her face and made sure her gloves were secure. "Stay close to me," he instructed. "The church is only a few streets away, but in this snow it is easy to get disoriented. Hold onto my arm and do not let go." Caroline did as instructed, grasping his arm tightly as they stepped out into the storm. The cold hit her like a physical force, stealing her breath. The snow was nearly knee-deep, and every step was a struggle. Ethan moved forward steadily, breaking a path for her to follow, and Caroline clung to him like a lifeline. The few streets of Lone Pine were completely deserted. Smoke rose from chimneys of small cabins and buildings, but no one was foolish enough to be outside in these conditions. Caroline could barely see more than a few feet in front of her, and she understood why Ethan had warned her about getting disoriented. Without him, she would have been hopelessly lost in minutes. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes, They reached a small white church with a cross on top. Ethan led her around to the side where a modest house stood, clearly the Reverend's residence. He knocked firmly on the door, and after a moment, it opened to reveal a middle-aged woman with a kind face and concerned eyes. "Ethan Gardner, what on earth are you doing out in this weather?" she exclaimed. "Get in here before you both freeze solid." They stumbled inside, and Caroline felt the blessed warmth of the house envelop her. The woman quickly shut the door against the cold and looked at them with open curiosity. "Mrs. Matthews, this is Caroline Porter," Ethan said, unwrapping his scarf. She missed her train yesterday because of the storm. She was supposed to be traveling to Cheyenne to meet her intended husband. She stayed at the station last night, but I thought she might be more comfortable here with you and the Reverend, if you have room. Mrs. Matthews' face filled with sympathy. "Oh, you poor dear. Of course you can stay with us. Let me get you some hot tea and you can tell me all about it." A man emerged from another room, tall and thin with a gentle face and graying hair. "What is all this commotion, Mrs.?" Matthews quickly explained the situation while Caroline sipped gratefully at the tea that had been pressed into her hands. Reverend Matthews listened thoughtfully, nodding along. "Naturally, you are welcome to stay with us," he said to Caroline. "We have a spare room. It is small, but it is warm and comfortable." "Thank you so much," Caroline said, relief flooding through her. "I do not know what I would have done if Ethan had not helped me." "Ethan is one of the good ones," Mrs. Matthews said warmly, patting his arm, "always ready to help anyone in need." Ethan looked slightly uncomfortable with the praise. "I should get back to the station. If anyone manages to get through with news or supplies, I need to be there." "In this storm," Mrs. Matthews shook her head, "do not be ridiculous. No one is going anywhere for at least another day. You should stay here too. We have room." "I appreciate that, but I have responsibilities." "The only responsibility you have right now is staying alive," Reverend Matthews said firmly. "The trains are not running, the telegraph is down, and no one in their right mind is traveling. You did your duty by helping Miss Porter. Now do your duty to yourself and stay somewhere safe and warm." Ethan hesitated, and Caroline saw the internal struggle on his face. Finally, he nodded. "You are right. Thank you for your hospitality." The rest of the day passed in a strange sort of peaceful domesticity. The storm continued to rage outside, but inside the Reverend's house, it was warm and cozy. Mrs. Matthews was a wonderful cook, and she prepared a hearty stew for lunch that filled Caroline's belly and made her feel more human than she had since the nightmare began. She found herself sitting by the fire with Ethan while the Reverend worked on his sermon for Sunday, and Mrs. Matthews worked on some mending. They talked about inconsequential things at first, but gradually the conversation deepened. "You ever get lonely out here?" Caroline asked him quietly. "You said you live alone in your cabin." Ethan considered the question. "Sometimes. But I prefer loneliness to poor company. After the war, I saw what desperation and violence could do to people. Out here, life is hard but honest. People do not pretend to be something they are not. There is a purity to that which I appreciate. Have you ever thought about marriage? Once. There was a girl back home before the war. We had an understanding. But she married someone else while I was away. Wrote me a letter saying she could not wait any longer, not knowing if I would come back or not. I understood her choice, but it cured me of romantic notions for a long while." "I am sorry. That must have hurt." Ethan shrugged. "It was a long time ago. I am a different person now than I was then. Sometimes I think about finding a wife, building a family. But I have not met the right woman, I suppose, and there are not exactly an abundance of unmarried ladies in Lone Pine." Caroline smiled. "Hence all the advertisements for mail-order brides." "Exactly. Though I have never placed one myself, it seems strange to me choosing a wife from a letter, but I suppose it is practical, and sometimes practicality is all we have. That is exactly what I told myself when I answered Mr. Thornton's advertisement, Caroline said softly. But the truth is, I hoped for more than just practicality. I hoped that maybe, somehow, there could be real affection between us. I think that is entirely possible, Ethan said, and his voice was gentle. You seem like a woman who has a lot of love to give. Any man would be lucky to receive it. Their eyes met, and Caroline felt something shift in the air between them. It was subtle but unmistakable, a sudden awareness that had not been there before. Or perhaps it had been there all along, and she was only now letting herself acknowledge it. Mrs. Matthews called them for dinner, breaking the moment, and they both stood and moved to the table. But Caroline could not stop thinking about the way Ethan had looked at her, the warmth in his gray eyes, the sincerity in his voice. That night, lying in the small guest room, Caroline stared at the ceiling and tried to sort through her confused emotions. She barely knew Ethan Gardner. They had met only yesterday, and yet there was something about him that drew her in, made her feel safe and seen in a way she had not felt since her parents died. But she was promised to Robert Thornton. She had made a commitment, and Caroline had been raised to honor her commitments. It did not matter that her heart seemed to be developing ideas of its own. She would get on that train to Cheyenne as soon as the storm passed, and she would marry the man who was waiting for her, and she would build a good life based on mutual respect and partnership. Even if a small part of her was starting to wonder if practical arrangements were really enough. The storm continued for 3 more days. The snow piled higher and higher, until the windows of the Reverend's house were almost completely blocked. They were well and truly snowed in, with no way to contact the outside world and no idea when the trains would run again. But inside the house, life took on a strange rhythm that Caroline found herself enjoying far more than she should. She helped Mrs. Matthews with cooking and cleaning, and she spent long hours talking with Ethan by the fire. They discussed everything under the sun: books, philosophy, their childhoods, their dreams for the future. Caroline learned that Ethan had taught himself to read as a child, borrowing books from a wealthy family his mother worked for. He had read everything he could get his hands on, from Shakespeare to technical manuals. His intelligence was quiet but deep, and Caroline found herself fascinated by the way his mind worked. She told him about growing up in Boston, the shop her parents had owned, the dream she had once had of seeing the world that had seemed impossible until tragedy forced her hand. She talked about her fears and hopes, and Ethan listened with an attention that made her feel truly heard. On the 3rd evening, after dinner, Reverend Matthews suggested they play cards to pass the time. They sat around the table, the 4 of them, playing a simple game and laughing at Mrs. Matthews' competitive streak. Caroline felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the fire in the hearth and everything to do with the company she was keeping. She glanced at Ethan and found him already looking at her, a soft smile on his face. Her breath caught slightly, and she had to force herself to look away and focus on her cards. "You know," Mrs. Matthews said conversationally, "I have known Ethan for 3 years now, and I have never seen him smile as much as he has these past few days." Ethan's ears turned slightly red. "You exaggerate." "I do not," Mrs. Matthews said firmly. "You are usually so serious, always working. It is nice to see you relaxed and happy." "Having good company makes a difference," Ethan said, and his eyes flickered to Caroline again. Reverend Matthews cleared his throat. "How long were you planning to stay in Cheyenne after your marriage, Miss Porter? Or will you be living on your intended's ranch right away?" "On the ranch, I believe." Mr. Thornton wrote that his home is quite large and comfortable. He has several hired men who help run the operation and a woman who comes in to cook and clean. I will be expected to take over the household management. And you are prepared for ranch life. It can be quite isolated. Caroline nodded. I think so. I am used to hard work and I have always enjoyed the outdoors. It will be an adjustment, certainly, but I am ready for a new challenge. What about love? Mrs. Matthews asked gently. Do you think you will grow to love Mr. Thornton? The question hung in the air. Caroline felt Ethan's gaze on her, intense and searching. I hope so, she said quietly. I believe love can grow from mutual respect and partnership. Not every marriage begins with passion. Some of the strongest marriages I have witnessed grew slowly, built on friendship and shared values. That is true, Reverend Matthews agreed. But there is also something to be said for that initial spark, that recognition of a kindred spirit. Have you experienced that spark with Mr. Thornton through his letters? Mrs. Matthews pressed gently. Caroline hesitated. The honest answer was no. Robert Thornton's letters had been pleasant and informative, but they had not made her heart race. They had not made her eager to receive the next one. They had been perfectly adequate, which was all she had thought she needed. But then she had met Ethan Gardner, and suddenly she understood what people meant when they talked about sparks and chemistry and immediate connection. And that understanding was deeply inconvenient, because she was promised to another man. I think we will suit each other well, she said finally, dodging the question. That is what matters. Ethan stood abruptly. I am going to step outside for a moment, get some fresh air. Ethan, it is freezing out there, Mrs. Matthews protested. I will just be on the porch for a minute. I need to clear my head. He grabbed his coat and stepped out before anyone could argue further. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Caroline felt terrible, though she was not entirely sure why. She had only answered honestly about her situation. Mrs. Matthews reached over and patted her hand. That young man has feelings for you, dear. Surely you have noticed. We barely know each other, Caroline protested weakly. Time is not always the measure of connection, Reverend Matthews said wisely. Sometimes two souls simply recognize each other. It happens. But I am promised to Mr. Thornton. I gave my word. Of course you did, and that honor is admirable, Mrs. Matthews said, but you have not yet married him. If you have doubts, if your heart is pulling you in another direction, would it not be more honorable to be honest about that before you make vows before God? Caroline felt tears burning her eyes. I do not know what I feel. Everything has happened so fast. A week ago, I was on a train heading toward what I thought was my future. Now I am snowed in with a man who makes me laugh and feel safe and seen, and I do not know if what I am feeling is real or just gratitude and circumstance. Those are fair questions, Reverend Matthews said. But perhaps you should ask yourself this. When you imagine your future now, who do you see beside you? Caroline closed her eyes, and the image that came immediately to mind was not Robert Thornton, a man she had never met. It was Ethan, with his kind gray eyes and quiet strength, his intelligence and his gentleness. It was Ethan working beside her, building a life together, facing challenges together. But that was just a fantasy, was it not? A dream born of proximity and strange circumstances. I need to think, she whispered. May I be excused? Of course, dear, Mrs. Matthews said kindly. Caroline went to her small room and sat on the bed, her mind whirling. She knew what Mrs. Matthews was suggesting, that she should break her commitment to Robert Thornton and pursue something with Ethan instead. But was that fair to any of them? She thought about Ethan's face when she had talked about marrying another man, the way he had left the room. If he had feelings for her, was it right to ignore them? But if she acted on her own growing feelings, was she just being selfish and impulsive? And what about Robert Thornton, who had done nothing wrong except wait for a bride who might not come? He had opened his heart in his letters, shared his loneliness and his hope for a new beginning. Did she not owe him at least a chance? Caroline lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, wishing desperately that her parents were still alive so she could ask them for advice. Her mother had always known what to say, how to cut through confusion to the heart of matters. A soft knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. "Yes, it is me," Ethan's voice came through the wood. "May I speak with you for a moment?" Caroline sat up and opened the door. Ethan stood there, snow melting in his hair from his time outside. He looked nervous, which was so unlike his usual steady demeanor that it made her heart ache. "Of course. Come in." Ethan entered the small room, leaving the door open for propriety's sake. He stood there for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, before speaking. "I need to say something, and I am going to say it poorly because I am not good with pretty words," he began. "But I cannot let you get on that train to Cheyenne without telling you the truth." Caroline's heart began to pound. "What truth? I know we have only known each other for a few days. I know you are promised to another man. I know that by all logic and reason, I should keep my mouth shut and let you go on with your life as planned." Ethan took a deep breath. "But these past few days have been the happiest I have had in years. Talking with you, laughing with you, just being near you, it has made me realize how empty my life has been. And I cannot help but think that maybe fate brought you to me for a reason. Maybe missing that train was not bad luck. Maybe it was the best luck either of us has ever had." Caroline felt tears sliding down her cheeks. "Ethan, I am not asking you to marry me instead," Ethan continued quickly. "I understand that would be crazy, but I am asking you to consider the possibility. Stay here in Lone Pine for a little while longer once the storm clears. Get to know me better. Give us a chance to see if what we are both feeling is real. And if it is not, if you decide you want to continue on to Cheyenne, I will personally make sure you get there safely. But if it is real, Caroline, if this connection between us is as genuine as I think it is, then we would be fools to throw it away." Caroline's mind was reeling. Everything he was saying echoed her own thoughts, her own confused feelings. "What if I am just grateful to you for helping me? What if this is not real?" "Then we will figure that out," Ethan said. "But what if it is real? What if you get on that train and spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been? Could you live with that, could you?" Caroline challenged. "No," Ethan admitted. "That is why I am standing here making a fool of myself, because I would rather take the risk and fail than never try at all." They stood there looking at each other, the air between them charged with possibility and fear and hope. Caroline felt as if she was standing on the edge of a cliff, about to either fly or fall. "I need to think," she said finally. "This is too important a decision to make on impulse." "I understand," Ethan said. "Take all the time you need. I am not going anywhere." He left the room, closing the door gently behind him, and Caroline sank back onto the bed. Her heart was telling her one thing, her sense of duty another, and she did not know which voice to listen to. That night, sleep was a long time coming. The next morning dawned clear and bright. The storm had finally passed, leaving Lone Pine buried under several feet of snow but bathed in brilliant sunshine. Caroline woke to the sound of shoveling and male voices outside. She dressed quickly and went to the window, looking out to see Ethan and Reverend Matthews clearing a path from the house to the street. Mrs. Matthews was in the kitchen making breakfast, and she smiled when she saw Caroline. "Good morning, dear. The worst has passed, thank goodness." Ethan is planning to make his way back to the station today to see about getting the telegraph working again. He will need to send messages to the rail company about the situation here. Caroline felt her stomach twist. Once the telegraph was working, she could send a message to Robert Thornton explaining what had happened. And then, presumably, she would wait for the trains to start running again and continue on to Cheyenne, unless she made a different choice. After breakfast, Ethan prepared to leave for the station. He bundled up against the cold, and Caroline found herself following him to the door. "Let me come with you," she said impulsively. "I could help." Ethan looked surprised. "The walk will be difficult. The snow is deep." "I do not care. I cannot just sit here waiting. I will go mad." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "All right, bundle up warm." They set out together, following the path that had been cleared and then breaking their own trail once they left the Reverend's property. The cold was intense, but the sun was warm on Caroline's face, and there was something invigorating about the pristine white landscape surrounding them. When they reached the station, Ethan immediately got to work checking the equipment and assessing what needed to be done. Caroline helped where she could, fetching tools and holding things steady while he worked. There was an easy rhythm to working together that felt natural and right. "The lines are damaged but not completely destroyed," Ethan announced after an hour of inspection. "I can probably get it working by tomorrow if I can make the repairs, but I will need to climb the pole outside, which will be dangerous with all the ice." "Be careful," Caroline said, worry flooding through her. The thought of Ethan being hurt made her chest tight with fear, and that fear told her something important about her feelings. "Always am," Ethan said with a small smile. He paused in his work and looked at her. "Have you thought any more about what I said last night?" Caroline nodded. "I have thought of little else. And I am terrified," Caroline admitted. "I am terrified of making the wrong choice. If I go to Cheyenne, I might be giving up something wonderful. But if I stay here, I might be throwing away a secure future for something that might not work out." "How do you ever know for certain?" Ethan set down his tools and came to stand in front of her. "You do not know for certain. That is the nature of life. Every choice is a risk. But I can tell you this: I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. And I think you feel the same way about me. Is that not worth taking a risk?" Caroline looked up into his face, at those steady gray eyes that had come to mean so much to her in such a short time. "What would it look like if I stayed? What are you really asking me?" "I am asking you to let me court you properly," Ethan said. "To give us time to build something real. If you stay, you could live with the Matthews family for now. I would come calling every evening and we would spend time together, and we would see if this connection deepens or fades. And if it deepens, if we find that we truly suit each other, then I would ask you to marry me. Not today, not tomorrow, but when we are both certain. And if it does not work out, then I will help you get to Cheyenne or wherever else you want to go," Ethan promised. "You will not be stranded or abandoned. I give you my word on that." Caroline's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Everything he was saying made sense, and more than that, it was what she wanted. She wanted time with Ethan. She wanted to explore these feelings, to see if they were the foundation of something lasting or just a temporary enchantment brought on by unusual circumstances. But to do that, she would have to hurt someone else. She would have to send a telegram to Robert Thornton breaking their agreement. She would have to take responsibility for that pain. "Mr. Thornton will be devastated," she said quietly. "He has been waiting for me. He made plans." "He will be disappointed," Ethan agreed. "But would it not be worse to marry him while having feelings for someone else? That would not be fair to either of you. Better a short disappointment now than a lifetime of regret." Caroline knew he was right. If she married Robert Thornton with her heart already half given to Ethan Gardner, she would be cheating him of the full partnership he deserved. and she would be cheating herself of the possibility of real love. "All right," she said, the words coming out in a rush before she could second-guess herself. "All right, I will stay. I will give us a chance." The smile that spread across Ethan's face was so bright and genuine that it took Caroline's breath away. He reached out and took her hands in his, squeezing gently. "You will not regret this, I promise you." "I am holding you to that promise," Caroline said, but she was smiling too, feeling light and terrified and exhilarated all at once. They stood there for a moment, hands clasped, looking at each other with the kind of hope that comes from taking a leap of faith. Then Ethan cleared his throat and stepped back, his professionalism returning. "I should get back to work. The sooner I get this telegraph working, the sooner you can send word to Mr. Thornton, and the sooner we can start our courtship properly." Caroline nodded, but her stomach twisted at the thought of composing that telegram. How did you tell someone you were not coming, that you were choosing someone else, in the limited words afforded by telegraph? Over the next day, as Ethan worked on repairing the telegraph line, Caroline sat at the small desk in the station and tried to compose her message. She went through several drafts, each one feeling inadequate. Finally, she settled on something simple and honest. "Mr. Thornton, I regret to inform you that I will not be continuing to Cheyenne. I have met someone here in Lone Pine and wish to explore that connection. I apologize for any disappointment this causes. I will return your travel money as soon as I am able. I wish you all the best in finding the partner you deserve. Caroline Porter." It was not perfect, but it was honest. When Ethan got the telegraph working the next afternoon, she sent it with trembling hands and then immediately sent another message to the rail company, explaining that she would not need passage to Cheyenne after all. "It is done," she said to Ethan, feeling strange and unmoored. "I suppose there is no going back now. Do you want to go back?" Ethan asked carefully. Caroline thought about it and realized the answer was no. "No, I do not. But it feels strange to have made such a significant decision so quickly." "Life out here moves quickly sometimes," Ethan said. "We do not have the luxury of taking years to decide things. Winter comes fast, summers are short, and opportunities do not wait around. You have to act when the moment presents itself." Over the following days, as Lone Pine began to dig itself out from under the snow and life slowly returned to normal, Caroline settled into a new routine. She stayed with Reverend and Mrs. Matthews, helping around the house and getting to know the small community. The people of Lone Pine were curious about her, but welcoming. They had heard that she was a mail-order bride who had missed her train, and that she was now being courted by Ethan Gardner, and this caused no small amount of gossip and speculation. But it was mostly good-natured, and Caroline found herself being warmly accepted. Ethan came calling every evening, just as he had promised. They would sit in the Matthews parlor and talk for hours, sometimes playing chess or cards, sometimes just enjoying each other's company. Mrs. Matthews chaperoned, but she had a knack for being present without being intrusive, giving them space to get to know each other. Caroline learned more about Ethan's past, about the family he had left behind in Missouri after the war. His parents had both died while he was away fighting, and his younger sister had married and moved to California. He was essentially alone in the world, which was part of why he had been drawn to the isolated life in Wyoming. "You miss having family?" Caroline asked one evening as they sat by the fire. "Sometimes," Ethan admitted, "but I have learned that family is not just about blood. The people here in Lone Pine, they have become like family to me, and someday I hope to have a family of my own." "Children?" Caroline asked. "Definitely children. I want a house full of them, chaos and laughter and little feet running everywhere." Ethan smiled at the thought. "What about you? "Do you want children?" "Yes," Caroline said without hesitation. "I always imagined having at least 3 or 4. I was an only child and sometimes it was lonely. I want my children to have siblings, to have each other." "We agree on that then," Ethan said, and the way he said, "we" made Caroline's heart skip a beat. As the weeks passed, and winter began to loosen its grip on Wyoming, Caroline found herself falling deeper in love with Ethan. It was not the dramatic, overwhelming passion of romance novels, but something steadier and more profound. It was in the way he listened when she talked, really listened, absorbing every word. It was in the way he made her laugh with his dry humor. It was in the small kindnesses, the way he always made sure she had the warmest seat by the fire, the way he brought her books he thought she might enjoy, the way he looked at her as if she were the most fascinating person in the world. She also fell in love with Lone Pine itself. It was a small town, to be sure, but it had character and heart. The general store was run by a friendly couple named the Harrisons who always had time to chat. The blacksmith, a massive man named Samuel Johnson, was gentle with horses and had a beautiful singing voice that echoed from his shop. There was a small schoolhouse where Mrs. Henderson was teaching again now that the weather had improved. Even though her boarding house was still being rebuilt, Caroline began helping out at the school, assisting Mrs. Henderson with the younger children. She had always loved children, and she found the work rewarding. The kids adored her, and she felt a sense of purpose that she had not felt since her parents died. One evening in early March, after Caroline had been in Lone Pine for almost 3 months, Ethan took her for a walk. The snow was melting, revealing brown grass and the first hints of green. The air was still cold but held the promise of spring. They walked to a small hill on the edge of town, and from there they could see the mountains in the distance, purple and majestic against the setting sun. It was beautiful, and Caroline understood what Ethan had meant all those weeks ago when he talked about the harsh beauty of this land. "I have something I want to show you," Ethan said. He led her down the other side of the hill to a flat piece of land with a small creek running through it. "This property is for sale. The owner moved back east last year and he is looking to sell. I have been saving money for a long time and I have almost enough to buy it." Caroline looked around, taking in the land. It was beautiful with good water and flat space for building. "What would you do with it?" "Build a house," Ethan said simply. "A real house, not just a cabin. Something with room for a family. I have the plans all drawn up. It would have a big kitchen and a parlor with a fireplace and at least 3 bedrooms upstairs, maybe 4. Caroline's breath caught. She looked at Ethan and saw nervousness and hope warring on his face. "Caroline Porter," he said, taking her hands in his, "I love you. I have loved you since you walked into my station during that blizzard, cold and scared and so incredibly brave. These past months have been the happiest of my life, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it. Will you marry me? Will you let me build that house for us, for our family, for our life together?" Tears sprang to Caroline's eyes, but they were happy tears. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you. I love you too, Ethan, so much." Ethan pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a sweet, gentle kiss that promised a lifetime of love and partnership. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "I do not have a ring yet," Ethan said apologetically. "I wanted to ask you first, make sure you would say yes before I spent the money." "I do not need a ring," Caroline assured him. "I just need you." But Ethan did get her a ring, a simple gold band with a small diamond, and he presented it to her 2 days later at Sunday dinner at the Matthews house. Everyone in Lone Pine was thrilled about the engagement. It seemed the entire town had been rooting for them. They were married 6 weeks later in the small white church, where Caroline had sheltered from the storm. It was a simple ceremony but filled with love. Caroline wore a dress that Mrs. Matthews and some of the other ladies in town had helped her make, a beautiful cream-colored gown with delicate lace trim. Ethan wore his best suit, and Caroline thought he had never looked more handsome. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony, and every resident of Lone Pine seemed to be packed into the small church to witness it. When Ethan kissed his bride, the congregation erupted in cheers and applause. The reception was held at the church hall, with food contributed by everyone in town. There was dancing and laughter and joy, and Caroline felt as if her heart might burst with happiness. She kept catching Ethan's eye across the room, and every time she did, he would smile at her with such love that it took her breath away. As the sun was setting, they left the celebration and walked to Ethan's cabin, where they would live temporarily while their house was being built. Ethan had spent the past weeks fixing it up, making it as comfortable as possible for his new wife. That night, lying in Ethan's arms in his small cabin, listening to the wind outside, Caroline marveled at how her life had changed. 6 months ago, she had been alone and struggling in Boston, answering advertisements from strangers in a desperate attempt to find security. And now she was married to a man she loved deeply, part of a community that had welcomed her, building a life that felt real and right and full of promise. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan murmured, running his fingers through her hair. "About fate," Caroline said. "About how missing that train was the best thing that ever happened to me. To both of us," Ethan agreed. He kissed the top of her head. "I am going to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret it," Caroline assured him. "You are my home, Ethan. Wherever you are, that is where I belong." As spring turned to summer, their house began to take shape. Ethan worked on it every day after his shift at the station, and many of the men from town came to help. It was the way of things in Lone Pine. When someone was building or needed help, the community showed up. Caroline was deeply touched by the generosity and kindness. She and Ethan would often go to the building site in the evenings, walking through the framework and imagining how it would be when it was finished. Caroline planned where the furniture would go, what curtains she would make, where they would plant the garden. It was exciting and wonderful, dreaming together about their future. In July, Caroline realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks but wanted to be certain before she told Ethan. When she finally shared the news, his joy was uncontainable. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure delight. "We are going to have a baby," he kept saying, as if he could not quite believe it. "You are going to be a mother and I am going to be a father." "Are you happy?" Caroline asked, though she could see the answer on his face. "Happy does not even begin to cover it," Ethan said. "You have given me everything I ever wanted, Caroline. A wife I adore, a home, and now a child. I am the luckiest man alive." They moved into their new house in September, just as the first leaves were beginning to turn. It was not quite finished. There were still details to complete, trim to be painted, a few more pieces of furniture needed. But it was livable and beautiful, and Caroline had never been more proud of anything. The kitchen was bright and spacious, with windows that looked out over the creek. The parlor had the fireplace Ethan had promised, perfect for cold winter nights. And upstairs, there were 4 bedrooms, one for them, one that would be the nursery, and 2 more for the children they hoped to have. Caroline spent hours making the house a home, sewing curtains, arranging their few possessions, creating a space that felt warm and welcoming. She planted flower beds around the front, even though it was late in the season, imagining how beautiful they would be next spring. Their first night in the house, they lay in their new bed in their new bedroom, and Ethan pulled Caroline close, his hand resting gently on her slightly rounded belly. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you for taking a chance on us. Thank you for staying when you could have left." "Thank you for asking me to," Caroline replied. "Thank you for seeing me, really seeing me and loving what you saw." In February of 1877, exactly 1 year after Caroline had missed her train in the blizzard, she gave birth to their first child. It was a difficult labor, long and painful, but when the midwife finally placed the baby in her arms, Caroline forgot all about the pain. "It is a boy," Mrs. Matthews announced, beaming. She had attended the birth along with the midwife, providing support and encouragement throughout. Ethan, who had been pacing downstairs, came bursting into the room the moment he was allowed. His face when he saw his wife and son was something Caroline would remember for the rest of her life, pure wonder and love and awe. "He is perfect," Ethan breathed, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after Caroline's father, and from the moment he came into their lives, he was adored by everyone. The people of Lone Pine celebrated his birth as if he were everyone's child, bringing food and gifts and love. As Thomas grew from an infant into a toddler, Caroline and Ethan settled into the rhythms of family life. Ethan continued to work at the station and tend their small herd of cattle. Caroline cared for Thomas and their home, occasionally helping at the school when Mrs. Matthews needed an extra hand. They had 2 more children over the next 5 years, a daughter they named Sarah, and another boy they named James. Their house was indeed filled with the chaos and laughter, and little feet running everywhere that Ethan had dreamed of, and every day felt like a gift. On winter evenings, when the children were asleep and Caroline and Ethan sat by the fire, they would sometimes talk about that storm, that moment when their lives had intersected in the most unexpected way. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you had made that train?" Ethan asked one night. Caroline considered the question. "Sometimes, but I do not think I would have been as happy. Mr. Thornton seemed like a good man, but he was not you. He would not have known how I take my coffee, or that I hum while I cook, or that I am afraid of spiders but try to be brave about it. He would not have made me laugh the way you do, or held me the way you do, or loved me the way you do." "I am glad you missed that train," Ethan said, pulling her closer. "Best thing that ever happened to both of us." "Actually," Caroline corrected with a smile, "the best thing was you having the courage to tell me how you felt. If you had not done that, I might have gotten on the next train and never looked back. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." "We saved each other," Ethan said. "That is what love does." As the years passed, their life in Lone Pine continued to unfold in wonderful ways. The town grew slowly but steadily, and Ethan eventually became the station master, a position of some importance. Caroline became known for her work with the school and her beautiful garden, which became the envy of everyone in town. Their children grew strong and healthy, thriving in the clear mountain air. Thomas was serious and thoughtful like his father, already showing an aptitude for numbers and mechanics. Sarah was bold and adventurous, always the first to climb trees or explore the creek. James was the peacemaker, gentle and kind, always making sure everyone was happy. Caroline never heard from Robert Thornton again. She had sent him the money for the train ticket, as promised, along with another letter of apology. She never received a response, and she hoped that meant he had moved on and found someone better suited to him. Sometimes, travelers passing through Lone Pine would stop at the station and comment on what a friendly town it was, how happy everyone seemed. Ethan would smile and agree, and later he would tell Caroline about it. "They are right, you know," he said once. "This is a happy place. Not because life is easy, it is not. The winters are still brutal, the summers still too short, and there is always hard work to be done. But the people here care about each other. They look out for one another. That makes all the difference. We are part of that, Caroline said. We have built something good here, not just for ourselves, but for our children and this community. Thanks to a blizzard and a missed train, Ethan said with a grin. Thanks to fate, Caroline corrected. Thanks to courage and taking chances and believing that sometimes the best things happen when your plans fall apart. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Ethan surprised Caroline with a trip. He arranged for Mrs. Matthews to watch the children for a few days, and they took the train. Oh, the irony to Cheyenne, staying in a nice hotel and eating in restaurants and seeing the sights. It was wonderful and exciting, but Caroline found herself missing home by the second day. She missed the children, missed their house, missed the quiet rhythms of life in Lone Pine. Cheyenne was impressive, but it was not where she belonged. Ready to go home? Ethan asked on the morning of the third day, reading her expression. Is that terrible? Caroline asked. We are supposed to be enjoying this adventure. Not terrible at all, Ethan assured her. I feel the same way. Home is where we are meant to be. They took the afternoon train back to Lone Pine, and when they arrived at the station, all three of their children came running to greet them, tumbling into their arms with cries of joy. Caroline felt tears in her eyes, overwhelmed with love for her family. That night, lying in their bed with Ethan beside her, and knowing their children were safe in their rooms down the hall, Caroline thought about how far she had come from that scared, desperate woman who had answered a stranger's advertisement. She had been looking for security and survival, but she had found so much more. She had found love and purpose and a place where she truly belonged. As the years continued to pass, life brought both joys and challenges. There was a terrible drought one summer that nearly destroyed their cattle herd. Caroline's garden withered despite her best efforts, and the entire town struggled with food supplies. But they helped each other, sharing what little they had, and they made it through. Thomas grew into a fine young man, eventually going to work for the railroad company himself, following in his father's footsteps. Sarah, true to her adventurous nature, shocked everyone by becoming a teacher and eventually marrying a traveling photographer, going with him to document the changing West. James stayed in Lone Pine, taking over the management of the family ranch and marrying a sweet girl from a neighboring settlement. Caroline and Ethan became grandparents, and their house once again filled with the sound of children's laughter when their grandchildren came to visit. Caroline loved nothing more than baking cookies with her granddaughters and watching Ethan teach his grandsons how to fish in the creek behind their house. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the town of Lone Pine threw them a celebration. It seemed everyone they had ever known came, friends and neighbors, their children and grandchildren, people from surrounding settlements who had heard about the ticket agent, and the mail-order bride who had found love during a blizzard. There were speeches and toasts, and Reverend Matthews, now quite elderly but still presiding over the church, spoke about how their love story had become legendary in the region. He talked about faith and courage, and the mysterious ways that fate works to bring people together. When it was Ethan's turn to speak, he stood and pulled Caroline up beside him. I am not much for public speaking, he said, his voice steady despite the crowd. But I want to say this. 30 years ago, a storm brought the most precious gift of my life right to my doorstep. I almost let her leave. I almost kept silent about my feelings, telling myself it was not my place to interfere with her plans. But I took a risk, and it was the best decision I ever made. He turned to Caroline, taking both her hands in his. You have made every day of these 30 years an adventure and a joy. You have given me children I am proud of, grandchildren who bring me endless delight, and a home that is filled with more love than I ever thought possible. I look at you now, and I still see that beautiful, brave woman who walked into my station during a blizzard. And I thank God every day that you chose me." Caroline was crying openly now, not caring who saw. "I love you," she said simply. Then, now, and always. They kissed while everyone cheered, and Caroline felt as young as she had on their wedding day. As they entered their later years, Caroline and Ethan slowed down but never stopped. They still walked to the hill where Ethan had proposed, still held hands during church services, still sat by the fire on winter evenings telling each other stories they had heard 100 times before. When Ethan retired from the railroad, he spent more time on the ranch with James, teaching him everything he knew. When Caroline's arthritis made it difficult to work in her beloved garden, she sat in a chair and directed operations, and her granddaughters did the planting and weeding under her watchful eye. They talked often about the strange paths that had brought them together. Caroline would sometimes pull out the old advertisements she had answered, the letters from Robert Thornton, reading them with a mixture of nostalgia and gratitude that things had worked out differently than planned. "I wonder whatever became of him," she mused one day. "I hope he found happiness." "I hope so too," Ethan said. "Though I confess I am selfishly glad his happiness was not with you," Caroline laughed. "If I had married him, I never would have known what I was missing. That is the saddest part of all living a decent life, but never knowing the extraordinary love that was possible." "We are very lucky," Ethan agreed. "Not everyone gets what we have." On a cold December day in 1906, 30 years after that fateful blizzard, another winter storm descended on Lone Pine. Caroline and Ethan sat by their fire, watching the snow fall outside their window, both of them thinking about that day so long ago when their lives had changed forever. "You have any regrets?" Caroline asked. It was a question she had asked before, but it felt important to ask again now that they were old. "Not a single one," Ethan said firmly. "Except maybe that I did not kiss you sooner," Caroline smiled. "We have made up for lost time. That we have." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the storm. Caroline thought about everything they had built together, their home, their family, their life in this small Wyoming town. She thought about the risks they had taken and the faith they had shown in each other. She thought about all the small moments that had added up to a lifetime of love. "The best decision I ever made," she said softly, "was staying on that platform, was trusting you, was believing that sometimes the unexpected path is the right one." "Then marry me instead," Ethan said, repeating the words he had spoken so long ago. "Those were the most important words I ever said, and you gave me the most important answer." "Yes," Caroline said, just as she had then. "Yes, and yes, and yes." They grew old together in their house by the creek, surrounded by family and friends, pillars of their community. Their love story became the stuff of local legend, told and retold at gatherings, an inspiration to young couples just starting out. Caroline lived to see her great-grandchildren born, a new generation to carry on the legacy she and Ethan had built. She held them in her arms and told them stories about the wild old days, about blizzards and missed trains and the courage it takes to choose love over security. Ethan and Caroline celebrated 55 years of marriage before Ethan passed away peacefully in his sleep one spring night, with Caroline holding his hand. She mourned him deeply, but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, and the knowledge that they had loved each other well. Caroline lived another 3 years after Ethan's death. She spent that time in the house they had built together, surrounded by memories and family. On quiet evenings, she would sit by the window and look out at the land they had loved, and she could almost feel Ethan beside her. When she passed away in her sleep one winter night, with fresh snow falling outside, her children found her with a smile on her face. On her bedside table was a photograph from their wedding day, and tucked behind it was a faded piece of paper, the telegram she had sent to Robert Thornton all those years ago, telling him she was not coming, that she had found love where she least expected it. At her funeral, held in the same small white church where she and Ethan had married, Reverend Matthew's grandson spoke about a love that had defied convention and expectations. He told the story that everyone there already knew about a mail-order bride who missed her train in a winter storm, and a cowboy ticket agent who said, "Then marry me instead." And in telling that story, he reminded everyone that the best love stories are not the ones we plan, but the ones that happen when we are brave enough to say yes to the unexpected, to trust in connection and possibility, to choose love even when it is inconvenient and unplanned. Caroline and Ethan's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried that story forward, passing it down through generations. The house by the creek still stands today, a reminder of what can be built when two people choose each other against all odds. And sometimes, on winter nights when the snow falls heavy on Lone Pine, Wyoming, people swear they can see two figures walking hand in hand up the hill behind the old train station, young again and in love, eternal reminders that the most beautiful things in life often come from the storms we never wanted but always needed. Their story was one of love found in unexpected circumstances, of courage to choose differently, of a life built on mutual respect and deep affection. It was a story of family and community, of hard work and dedication, of faith in each other and in the possibility of happiness. Most importantly, it was proof that sometimes missing the train is exactly what you need to find the right destination.